think a broad summary is already given, but just in case you want to know the numbers, I'll give you a total. There were 24 bilaterals. One, of course, was the FMCGB informal breakfast that we had held. Then FMCGB itself, or G20. One IMFC breakfast. One IMFC plenary. One DC dinner. One DC plenary, and of course meeting with Indian industries in the SBI meet. That was a dinner. Then FICCI's representatives met me. Separately, of course, we had the Indian ambassador holding the India House meet, where some of the prominent policymakers of the US administration were there. Then the university students who had come here to meet me. Other than the engagement in the two universities about which you heard. Besides this, I think it's important to recognize that the secretaries and the chief economic advisor have held 25 meetings with their counterparts. CAs also addressed 2 investor forum meetings and had one-on-one meetings with 3 credit rating agencies. Then Additional Secretary Rajat Mishra had attended the annual plenary. So roughly itemized, this is where it is. Should I do an opening statement, or would you want to start asking the questions so that it can be pointed discussion?
We suggest we go for the questions next if everybody's ready. I'll call out the questions. Let's start with Prashant.
Ma'am, 2 questions, ma'am. The first is about G20. This has been a challenging year because of the geopolitical tensions that have risen. What was your sense of the priorities that were laid out by other countries, the finance ministers that you met, and how does India plan to navigate this challenging environment? If I may, ma'am, a second question, which is about 2 institutions that are within your ministry, the Enforcement Directorate and the Income Tax. There is a widely held perception that these institutions have been used to go after sections of private capital, but also civil society. ED's conviction rate is very low, yet there is a sense that it's the process which has become very difficult for civil society institutions which have been under investigation. Would you like to clarify and reassure think tank communities as well as capital about the role of ED and IT? Thank you.
On your first question on the G20 and its priorities, we've had a discussion bilaterally with very many G20 members. And also during the G20 meetings itself, the concern about this whole year when Indonesia had gone through a very difficult presidency, in that even in this meeting, if I can say that none of the meetings, the DC, the G20, FMCGB, couldn't come up with a communique at all. All of them have ended up coming up with some chair statement, but even their contentious issues had to be overnight. I really applaud all officials of all delegations for the night-long work that they have done to arrive at something, but still a communique was not possible at all. So very difficult year, and Indonesia has done its best. I really did mention it there, and I mention it here also, that they have remained calm and also attempted to get everybody on board for every decision. So yes, as a result, we will also be taking the presidentship at a time when there are so many challenges. So we'll have to work together with the membership to see how best we can navigate this whole thing. So that's about the G20. The other issue about income tax and ED. Well, ED is completely independent in what it does, and it is an agency which follows on predicate offences. The first offence is already picked up by any other agency, whether it is a CBI or any other agency, and it is post that the ED comes into the picture. So ED doesn't appear anywhere in the first instance. Um, I don't want to comment on the individual cases or the approach, but certainly there are instances which are so standing out, and if the ED goes there, it is with some prima facie evidence in its hand. And some of them have even been covered by the media yourselves. The quantum of money seized or any other precious jewelry or gold seized. So they have to act.
Next question. Shriram from.
Thank you, Minister, for doing this. Two questions. On the G20, you said that it was a real struggle and you didn't get the group didn't get like joint communiques. What would you say were the major issues, and how would you characterize China's position, because the US has singled out China on not playing ball with restructuring the debt and the common framework? That's question one. And if I may ask the second question, did you discuss the strength of the dollar at all with Janet Yellen, and could you describe those discussions if you had them? Thank you.
See, on the common framework, particularly because it has this debt-related issues, I think most countries recognized that the common framework is really not performing as much as it was expected to, because there are certain inherent handicaps, and there's a collective agreement that we have to make it a lot more nimble so that countries can be ready to take it up. Because if you notice, in the last 2 years, repeatedly we hear about only 3 or 4 countries which want the solution through the common framework, but even there it has not been delivered. So actually the number of countries which are in a huge burden of debt is actually much more than the 4 that we are talking about, and some of the 4 are pre-COVID. But post-COVID, you find that many countries are even more vulnerable, and therefore this issue of the common framework itself having to be tweaked or fine-tuned is an issue on which most countries agreed. Particular differences I don't want to elaborate, because it's also part of the whole the process and discussing with countries. There are 1 or 2 items in which India made its difficulties expressed, and I'm glad to say there we've had a consensus resulting in our point of view being appreciated. We opposed the OECD's inclusive forum on carbon mitigation approaches. The OECD's objective, I think, was to stock take and compare various carbon mitigation efforts. In the final draft, there is no reference to this OECD initiative. From our side, we were able to convince that it shouldn't be actually finding a place like that. Then also on the capital adequacy framework, we had some inputs. The language now makes it clear that the work on this issue will be continuing by the working group itself, while the boards of MDBs will consider the recommendation. So even that was a push that India undertook, and we are glad to say that that has been accommodated. And finally, on the climate finance, we have been very keen that private finance is coming on board, and on that possibly any conditionality is getting attached. We were very wary of, and I'm glad to say that India was able to drop the reference to private finance from the text itself. So from our side, the points that on which we were very concerned, we were able to convince, and therefore the chair statement did not have those uncertainties or discomfort elements from India's point of view. But of course, on many other issues, they were persistent, not just in this round, but earlier in Bali and before that as well. As a result, throughout there has been this difficulty that a communique could never be issued.
Ashwant?
Question on the dollar strength, if you had discussion.
No,
with
I
US
didn't.
Secretary.
I didn't have any discussion.
Thank you so much, Fifam. Two questions. One, ma'am, as you're aware, the US Fed has cut interest rates several times and several more cuts are coming. And there are genuine fears of recession are being around the corner. The magnitude of the recession is what the debate is about, whether it's going to be a slight recession or it's going to be a big recession. How worried are you about the direction of the US economy? And do you think India would be, how prepared is India to deal with this? Because the last recession, India was kind of wasn't affected that badly, 2008, around that time. And the second, ma'am, in your Brookings speech, you spoke about rising energy prices, and you said, if these prices kept going up, we may have to go back to coal, or we'll have to depend more and more on coal, which is not where India wants to go. Are these real fears, or you're trying to put the scare of God into these guys? And what was the intention? Thank you.
Oh, no. I'll answer your second question first. I'm not putting any scare of God into anybody. The Western world has seen countries moving to coal. Austria has already said, and today did I say that they're going back to coal? Did I see a news item today that in UK the Battersea, one of the oldest legacy thermal units, is back again? It's a beautiful landmark for London, but then, matter of fact, it is now reviving itself as a thermal unit. So it's not just India. Many countries have gone back. And coal is now going to be back again because I think gas cannot be afforded, or it is not available as much as you want. And Europe, of course, has made a conscious decision that they can't, get any more gas from Russia, and they have to look for other sources. They've gone back to coal. It's not just us. So that's one. And your first question was on
Recession.
US economy and the recession. Well, talking about recession in the US, there's no official announcement, so I can't be speculating on it.
Thank you so much for doing this, ma'am. Just earlier this week, the Indian rupee traded a bit weaker as geopolitical tensions continue to build up. What is your assessment of the challenges that the rupee could see in the days ahead, and what measures are being taken to tackle the slippery slide?
First of all, I would look at it as not rupee sliding. I will look at it as dollar strengthening. Dollar strengthening incessantly. So obviously all other currencies are performing against a strengthening dollar. And I'm not talking technicalities, but it is a matter of fact that India's rupee probably has withstood this dollar, rates going up, the exchange rate in favor of dollar strengthening is there, and I think Indian rupee has performed much better than many other emerging market currencies. But I think the efforts are by the RBI more towards maintaining a certain, more towards seeing that there are not too much of volatility. It is not to intervene in the market to fix the value of rupee. So containing the volatility is the only exercise that RBI is involved in. And I've said this before, the rupee will find its own level.
Next question, Dalit from
Thank you, ma'am. Indonesia's finance minister during her press conference said that India has briefed the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors about its priorities next year. And she also said that she and the other G20 members have offered the full support to that. Can you give us a what is that India's priority for next year? And secondly, on cryptocurrencies, I think there's a move from India's side, which G20s have given a positive response to that, and also among the G7 countries on how to deal with that, about the regulations and other things as well, if you can see.
Yes, I'm grateful indeed that we had held an informal breakfast with all the G20 members. Uh, there was a very positive and cooperative mood. Unhesitatingly, I found all of them extending cooperation and saying India's year as presidentship should, you know, take on issues, and we're all here to support and cooperate with you. And that was expressively said. Whilst I've not laid out the clear agenda in every detail, we spoke about the broad issues on which we'll be interested. And in that, in no particular order, I wish to say that we will certainly be wanting the G20 membership to discuss on how the multilateral development banks can better leverage the endowment that they have. Also think in terms of getting other sources through which their finances can improve, because one, that they have to be more nimble in reaching out for developmental funding, and two, they have to better effectively deploy the resources that they have. So that will certainly be one of the things that we will be working out, and how that becomes a agenda point and how specifically we are going to tailor make it is subject to taking inputs from everybody. Second is also looking at the debt situation. I know solutions were arrived at during the pandemic, the sustainability initiative, debt DSSIs, but on that, that period is gone. But now the vulnerabilities of more countries are coming out. Many middle-income countries themselves are at high risk. The common framework, I've already answered about it, has not really delivered as much as we expected it to be. So that will certainly be one of the issues which during our presidency we would want the membership to discuss and have some kind of a outcome, because that is so urgently required. Third, we'll be talking about climate finance. Although even as we talk about climate finance, and I know these institutions are the ones to think about financing and finding the resources and spending, we still think a large part of this debate will have to be within the UNFCCC. So the environment related issues should emanate from there. Certainly there will be a role for the multilateral bodies. So climate finance certainly. Crypto, you asked it as a second question, but that will also be part of India's thing. And during our engagements, we've heard that already institutions which are associated with the G20 or the World Bank or any other are doing their own assessment and studies of matters related to cryptocurrencies or crypto assets. They could be the FSP, they could be the BIS, they could also be IMF themselves. So we would definitely want to collate all this and do a bit of study and then bring it on to the table of the G20 so that members can discuss it and hopefully arrive at a framework or SOP, so that globally countries can have a technology driven regulatory framework. This is derived from the first assumption that no one single country can effectively handle or regulate crypto in any form. But implicit in this is that we don't want the technology to be disturbed. We want the technology to survive and also be in a position for the fintech and other sectors to benefit from it. But if it is a question of platforms trading on assets which are being created, buying and selling, making profits, and more importantly in all this, are countries in a position to understand the money trail? Are we in a position to establish for what purpose it's being used? Because the recent experience of in India, and there again one of the points for the ED that you want to take as a good example is we detected substantial money laundering, probably cases related to, it was also put in the media, cases related to crypto assets and trading of assets. So this concern has been actually acknowledged by several members of the G20, saying yes, money trail, yes, money laundering, yes, drug misuse, and so on. So we need to have, there is an understanding that we need to have some kind of a regulation, and that all the countries will have to be together on it. No one country is going to be able to singularly handle it. So on that, we'll certainly have something.
Next question, Seema.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask you about FATF, the kinds of discussions you had. Was there any discussion on Pakistan? And my second question is about our trade deficit with China. It's gone up to, I believe, now $87 billion. What measures is the government taking to sort of tackle that? Because whether it's decoupling or any other measures. Thank you.
In our discussion with the FATF, there were no one country reference. We were discussing on general issues about FATF. No specific country was talked. Trade deficit is actually growing, and it's growing across the board, meaning we are importing a lot more than exporting, and the net is definitely going against us. But we're also keeping a watch as to if there's a disproportionate increase against any one country. Equally, if you look into the items that are imported, they are less of final consumption goods and more of intermediary goods. And when I say more of raw materials and intermediary goods, it's also got a potential for value addition and exports. So I wouldn't want to immediately get anxious about this, net deficit, meaning imports being far higher than exports, because I think carefully if you look at it, the kind of imports that are happening are very essential also for our industrial activity and for our value addition for exports purposes.
Next question, Vishnu.
Thank you, ma'am. Finance Minister of Indonesia, Sri Mulyani Indrawati, after the G20 finance ministers meeting, had warned that the world is in dangerous condition due to the challenging global economic situation. Now that India is taking over the G20 presidency in December, how do you view that statement? And my second question is about the CBDC's pilot project, which is expected to begin soon. Can you please talk about the pilot project and India's future on digital currency? Thank you.
Well, Sri Mulyani's statement on the situation prevailing and the challenges that we'll have to face comes out of our experience of 1 year of having been the chair of G20. And it's also something which every country is concerned about. So there are a lot of challenges for every country. And for India, it is more extraneous factors which are going to be the challenges that we'll have to get ourselves prepared for. And also that it is going to be inherited from Indonesia to India during the presidency. We'll have to learn our lessons from her way of having handled it and also find our own course for navigating through the presidency. But the challenges that which worry all of us are there for everybody to feel and work around. On the digital currency, meaning central bank driven currency, digital currency, the RBI is working on it. So may not be right for me to comment on it at the moment. They will obviously announce.
Next question, Sukhpalji from PTC.
My question is, that is a follow-up question on your statement in Brookings Institute on farmers and the other policies on farming. As you have mentioned, there are such new policies which you said Annadata, Urjadata. And is there anything came up after your statement during your other meetings to support India's policy during World Bank or IMF meetings? And second is, as you have mentioned, ample credit facilities for the farming. And which one is, which looks like very good idea, cooperation societies or something, the people can stock their stock and then they can sell. Will be any credit limit available or future policy will be if they stock and they need some money so they can get credit limit from the banks or anywhere? If you can further clarify those things. Thank you.
On India's policy and the kind of things that we are doing at the ground level, have countries appreciated it or anybody here? Is your first question. There's certainly a lot of appreciation. In fact, with a sense of amazement that India could do it in such a short period, is the digital applications which have been successful, how people have adapted to it, and the way in which across the board now digital is panned out. It's not just payment, it is also health, it's also education, it's also looking at health-related, vaccination-related, COVID, and so on. So the India stack, which you talked about, financial inclusion and also payment alone, is not the point of admiration, but it's also the others which are rapidly developed, but even better that we were able to spread it and reach a level of saturation in many of them. And that it is kept as a common public good is also recognized. And in fact, there are overt suggestions by many members that during the G20, we should showcase what we've done in our digital, achievements in terms of the way in which Aadhaar is spread, the way in which other digital applications have spread in the country. In fact, today in my meeting with the World Bank, President David Malpass himself said that you should now showcase the deepening of digital applications in India and how common people have accepted it. And he said he will be happy from the World Bank side to work together with India to be able to take it to the other parts of the world. So there is not just the World Bank, but every bilateral I've had, people have really spoken very highly of India's achievement on the digital side. On, you started talking about the farmer and then also said, would you be able to explain on the credit availability for storage and for other things? There are a lot of steps taken. In fact, the Kisan credit card is not just now available for farmers alone. It's available for animal husbandry, meaning people who keep animals, bovine for milk, or even keeping sheep or goat or even piggery. They all get a Kisan credit card for their farming and allied activities. And that means at concessional rates they can take loans from the bank. And also today, for example, if I were to take the point of animal husbandry or any of these animal keeping, veterinary services are now available in district level, funded by the center. Mobile clinics are available for maintaining animals. So there's a high accent given for farmer who either doubles up doing these, or farmers who are no longer doing farming but mainly dependent on these. Beekeeping is another. And there's been a lot of interest among small farmers in taking on these kind of activities, because today, through the e-market revolution which is happening through the government and also through private players, they are able to get access to some of the markets which they wouldn't have been able to access earlier. So, of course, Urja Data is happening in a rapid way, because rooftop solar panels or keeping solar panels in the hedges of farm have also resulted in farmers being able to produce for themselves, and the surplus is also uploaded to the grid and they earn money out of that. So there is now ample other ways in which government is supportive of additional income earning sources. And one last point, the formation of the FPO, farmer producer organizations, wherein groups of farmers can come together and maybe take up the activity of setting up silos in villages, wherein aggregated grains can be stored, not sold as soon as they come out of the farms, as soon as the harvest, for a distress price, because supply being in glut, the price they may get may not be adequate. So they could sell it after a period of time if they only had the right kind of storage facility. So the government also helps in farmer producer organizations or the SHG groups to set up storage in villages. Viability gap funding is also given for food processing industries which get set up, in which the FPOs themselves can participate and earn a profit out of it, unlike as members of cooperatives who don't have a share in the profit but they collectively do it. But here the FPOs can earn their profit legitimately. And food processing activities do have an income tax concession for the first 5 years that they engage in that business.
Thank you so much. Friends, we have time for 2 more questions. Chitananji.
Hi, Namaste FM. The downside of, or a small but significant downside of rapid digitalization is the exponential increase in spamming, scamming, phishing. Anyone who lives here, we feel at least one call a day, typically originating from India, desperate to refund us some IRS money or to put money in our accounts. And I believe the problem is no less in India. I, in fact, saw there's a television serial called Jamtara, which goes into this whole phishing thing. And there have been many arrests also in India and here. Has this issue ever figured in your talks with your US interlocutors? Is there any concerted effort on part of Government of India to stamp this out, lest we acquire the reputation of Nigeria in the 90s when it was famous for those online scams? Has this issue come across your table?
No, this issue has not come across, I have not come across it here in any of the discussions. However, India and the government there is actually working intensely to contain these kind of activities which are not right. The data protection bill is, the old one was withdrawn, the new one is likely to come sooner. But in the meanwhile, action is being taken on spamming and unsolicited calls and messages. But of course, they keep coming. It's not as if it is all extinguished till yesterday and today nothing has happened. They keep coming up like mushrooms. But Government is well seized of this matter, and efforts are on. And even in the newer data or digital based kind of services which are being extended to people, like the account aggregator, there is a conscious attempt to make sure that consent of the data owner is used, and used for that specific purpose for which the consent is given. And there is a high level of monitoring in this, particularly in the banking sector, which I closely monitor, even in the account aggregator, where we came across some kind of a misuse by some outsourced elements. We have clamped down severely, and you would have heard of arrests of some people who misused these kind of data apps for lending money. Particularly in Andhra and Telangana, we had arrested a lot of nationals from one country who had misused the data. So there's action happening equally, preventive steps happening equally, but of course that has to be kept up.
Seema?
Ma'am, in your speech to Brookings, in your prepared remarks, you said, in the near term, advanced nations must take responsibility for the global spillover of their political and economic decisions. So, in
some of the meetings inside as well.
That's what I was going to ask. So, what was the reaction of Janet Yellen?
I didn't particularly notice any one minister and their reaction, but I did say this. And incidentally, at a different meeting in there, Sri Mulyani also voiced it. Maybe one or two other countries also voiced it. If I'm not mistaken, the lady finance minister, was she from Nigeria? She also said it. There were several others who said it as well. Incidentally, all of them are from the South, developing countries, saying that the unintended consequences of certain action taken or the spillover of policies are definitely hurting our countries.
Prashant?
Ma'am, I was wondering whether you'd like to comment on the macro fundamentals of the Indian economy. How do you see the fisc and current account situation? We seem to be pretty far away from the FRBM original glide path that had been laid out. I know it's due to external circumstances, but do you see, especially given what the state's fiscal deficit also is, both on fisc and current account, if you would like to say something?
Your one question has too many components on which may not be ideal for me to comment, but if you're looking on a month, it won't be possible for me to answer. But certainly we are conscious how our commitments given on the fiscal glide path given will have to be adhered to. I'm conscious of that. So, the fundamentals are good, macroeconomic fundamentals are good. The foreign exchange reserve is good, however much it can get reported saying it's come down by this much. We're in a comfortable position. And that is why I keep repeating saying inflation is also at a manageable level, and there can always be people who would say, well, 7.4, are you saying it's manageable? Well, I love to be bringing it down further below 6, and we are making efforts for it. Single-digit inflation, and this is not to be immediately, interpreted as, finance minister said 7 should not be worried. I'm not saying it then. Look at the way in which Turkey and countries like that, and the inflation rates. Countries are being very severely impacted through the external factors. We are also being impacted. But because of the various measures we are taking timely each time, we are able to bring it to this level at least and hold it. Ideally, at this time, to bring it to 4 will be just very good, but we are trying. So we have to be conscious of the position that we are in compared to the rest of the world. I'm not asking for celebration, but it is true that we are holding together. And I'm very conscious, particularly of the fiscal deficit.
Hard stop at 8. Thank you so much for joining today. This concludes the formal press conference. Thank you.